We live in a time where masculinity is shamed, and men don't know what it means to be a man. As a pastor and counselor, I've spent the better part of my life equipping and training others. My goal with this show is to translate my hard-earned experience into tools and tactics to help you become stronger as a man. This is the BraveCo podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bellet. Welcome back, BraveCo men, to the BraveCo podcast. I'm excited about this week's guest. His name's Lyle, and Lyle Wells has worked with leaders across all different spaces. He's been a leader. He's been a pastor. He's an expert coach. He's worked with sports teams. He's worked with church teams. He's just an awesome guy. I've had a chance a little bit just to get to know him, also doing some research on him. But he's come highly recommended from my friends. And Lyle, I'm so excited about this podcast, especially to dive into leadership. You've had a lot of years in leadership and in leading different organizations. And so I'd love to pull you in and ask some questions, but Lyle, would you maybe talk just for 1 or 2 minutes? Where did you get your leadership experience from? And and then we're gonna dive in. I'm gonna ask you some questions.
Thank you, Jason. For the men that are joining us today, the first thing is that I'm the only child of a widowed mother. So
Wow.
what you do, I've known the void almost my entire life. My father died when I was very young. I'm 60 years old, and Jason, I'll tell you, I miss my dad more today
Yeah.
than I ever did. There is nothing that I possess on this planet that I would not give up materially for one afternoon. My dad drove stock cars when he was a young man. I never saw it. I just saw pictures and heard stories. But every Sunday afternoon when I get home from church, I think about, what if my dad were still alive? We throw some steaks on the grill and sit down and watch a NASCAR race. And I just tear up a little bit thinking about it. So,
Yeah.
man, I just want you to know, you matter. And it does not matter how old your children are. You will always matter. So I think what part of that was just me starting to look for leadership in my life from other men very early, whether they were coaches, teachers in the classroom, youth pastors. When I got to college and I started being an athletic coach, I had some phenomenal older men who took me in as an intern and mentored me. And, I just have always been a guy that wants to figure it out, how to shoot a jump shot, how to hunt a whitetail. Like, I've always wanted to figure it out. And I think that's what started me on this journey of, everybody talks about leadership, but I had football coaches that thought leadership were cussing me, demeaning me, slapping me in the helmet. I had youth pastors that thought, leadership was, tell me all your feelings. And I didn't want to talk about my feelings.
Yeah.
I wanted to go play dodgeball with the
Yeah.
rest of the kids. So that's kind of been my lifelong journey, is how do you master this idea of imprinting your life on the life of another? Because
Mm.
ultimately, leadership is simply about influence, and we influence others and through our behaviors. So that's just a little bit of my bio and how I got
Wow.
so fascinated by the subject.
Man, your story is just really touching, about growing up without a father. My dad also grew up without a father, and my dad's dad drowned when he was 3 years old, and his other two stepfathers were very violent and abusive. And so really he grew up, um, just his grandfather, he would go to his grandfather's, ranch on the weekends, often in the summertime, and learn how to drive the tractor and, all that kind of stuff. And that was his first kind of father figure in his life that took care of him. His grandfather was an alcoholic as well, but really, really loved him. And so he has a really soft place in his heart for him. And thankfully his grandfather got saved,
Wow,
the year before he died.
that's a great story.
Yeah, it is so great. But my dad and I have often talked about the same thing. What would my dad give to have one day with his dad, to just hear him say, I love you, to throw the ball with, to have them saying, wow, I'm really proud of you. My dad doesn't have a dad that's saying, I'm so proud of you. Look at all the stuff that you've done. And so,
Well,
although I don't know what
Jason,
it's like, go ahead.
yeah, let me speak to that. My father was diagnosed with cancer the same month that my mother found out she was pregnant with
Oh
me.
my gosh.
And so he was not supposed to live long enough to see me be born. I was born a month premature. When my dad found that out, he was 1,000 miles away in the Veterans Hospital in Chicago, dying. And when he found out he had a son, he rallied and lived 6 years he had no business living.
Oh my
He was
gosh.
in the hospital a good bit of
Yep.
that, but I got to hear my dad say, "I love you." My dad every night would say, "I wouldn't trade you for anything in the world." And I'm 3 and I'd be like, "Dad, you wouldn't trade me for a brand new pickup? I wouldn't. You wouldn't trade me for a fishing boat? I wouldn't."
Wow.
So, I mean, that message resonates with me. I probably had more of a father in 6 years than some men have had in their lifetime.
Honestly.
But
Yep.
it's so the messages we send go directly to our children's hearts, and we can never forget that.
That's such an important point because we don't often realize that the voice in our kids' heads is most often going to be ours,
Yeah.
right? And if you didn't have a father, then often the absence of a father becomes the voice or a coach, and that's the beautiful thing around leadership and fathering, and is we often father kids that aren't our own. You can be that voice of encouragement, but it's true, man. As dads, remembering that what I am speaking into over my children, that becomes their inner voice. And we don't think about that a lot. And if we thought about it more, we'd pay more attention to it. But it's really true. And I want to dive in a bit into leadership because, this is mostly men who are listening to the podcast. I'm sure there's some women on here, but we're leaders. Men, we're called to be leaders. And there's often this idea that, for a lot of men, that they weren't born a great leader. And we have a phrase here at BraveCo that great men aren't born, they're built. But we also see how, some guys are born with better leadership skills. They're just more prone to being a leader than maybe somebody else. But we are all called to be a leader. If you have a family, you're leading your family. If you're single but you're working, at the least you're leading yourself. And a lot of the stuff that you've done has been in leadership. You have a book out, and I know you're working on another book, but you have a book out right now, The 5 Day Leader. And I just love for you to kind of give us just a short masterclass on what does it take to become a great leader? What's the first step in becoming a great leader? And what are some of the hurdles that are keeping men from being, great leaders, being effective in their homes, at work, in their own life?
Well, we start with this simple premise, Jason, is that I believe nobody wants to be average. I mean, I want every man,
It's
and I know
true.
there's some women on the podcast today as well. Think about when you were 10 years old. What did you want to be when you grew up? Right? Nobody said a middle level manager with a cubicle and a fake plant. I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to play third base for the Yankees. Other people want to sing on Broadway or be millionaires, or right. I mean, every little girl. I mean, I had the privilege of raising a son and a daughter. Every time I walked in on my daughter playing dress up, right? She was the princess going to marry a prince. She never played dress up to be a bridesmaid. I mean, nobody wants to be average. And when we think about having God's fingerprint on our lives, I mean, we're children of a king,
Yeah.
so of course we wouldn't. But on our way, as we grow, two things happen. We either get stuck. I mean, I'm not the third baseman for the Yankees because I ran out of skill. I got stuck, and I didn't have the skills to continue to play. Or we get scared, and we
Mm.
and we bail out on our own dreams. And so, if you'll just embrace that truth, nobody wants to be average, but we get stuck or we get scared.
Yeah.
So you think about Deuteronomy 3:28. The Lord has told Moses, "You're not going to lead the nation of Israel into the promised land." And then God tells him, "Go commission Joshua, strengthen and encourage him." strengthen him, get him unstuck, and give him courage so that he's not scared. I mean, we have a biblical foundation for that truth. So leadership is simply helping others get unstuck, giving them the skills they need, right? Or helping them overcome their fears. And so that's the first fundamental truth about leadership. So I agree. I think everybody is called to be a leader. The second thing is this: we teach that leadership is about behavior. So,
Mm,
Jason, you're absolutely right. Leaders are built just like men are built. And so leadership is a behavior that influences others and drives outcomes. So ultimately, my behaviors are either going to influence people and help them become unstuck and no longer scared, or, in the case of like alcoholic, unpredictable, abusive fathers that you described that your dad grew up, or stepfathers, they make people more scared and create even more dysfunctional patterns of behavior that they get stuck in. So ultimately, men, it's about the way that we behave.
mm,
And so we really want to look at really three categories. Number one, the energy or the effort that we bring. Do we model work ethic? Do we model um, diligence and persistence? There's an interesting story that I shared with my team yesterday for all the football fans. This year in college football, there's a young man at Boise State named Ashton Genty. He just won several awards. He rushed for over 2,400 yards
wow.
this year. It's the fourth best season a running back has ever had in college football, a
Wow.
sport that's been played for over 150 years. Here's what's amazing, Jason. In football, they chart a statistic called yards after contact. How many yards does a guy gain after the first time somebody hits him? Ashton Genty, 2,400 yards total. Over 1,800 of those yards this year came after somebody hit him.
Wow. That's
All right.
amazing.
Now, let me take it just one step further. The number two guy this year, the second most rushing yards was 1,660. So this kid, Ashton Genty, rushed for more yards after he's been hit this year than anybody else rushed for total. So, men, what are your yards after contact? How are we modeling pushing through? No, and we're a salesman. Are we modeling pushing through a difficult conversation with our wife? Do we let it go, and make it worse, or do we be persistent and respond with grace and truth and speak words of beauty and forgiveness and sorrow for our own behavior? So one is the effort we put in. The second is the empathy that we show.
Mm,
We challenge our leaders, and men, I'll challenge you. These three words, these three types of words need to fill your vocabulary. Words of acknowledgement. When a kid gives a good effort, when your wife, I at my house, I call it the laundry fairy. I show up and all my laundry's done. I don't even know how that happens,
yeah.
um, and and then I push it too far sometimes. I'm like, I'm glad we have a laundry fairy. I wish we had a grilled cheese fairy. I wonder where that person is.
Yeah.
But words of acknowledgement. The
Yeah.
second thing is words of appreciation. I think one of the most underused words in leadership are the words "thank you."
Yeah.
A paycheck is not a thank you note. Thanking your employees, thanking your students if you're a
Mm,
teacher, thanking the people that you live with, and then the last one are words of affirmation. And a word of affirmation is just calling out a characteristic or a behavior that's unique in somebody that we're leading. In Matthew chapter 3, when Jesus is baptized, he
yeah.
comes up out of the water, and you voice from heaven, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." Think about that for a minute. God the Father affirming Jesus the Son, one member of the Trinity affirming another. I mean, if affirmation means that much to the Lord, then what should it mean to us?
Mm,
So, words of empathy, words of energy, and then the last thing is execution. If I'm going to let my behavior influence others, then Jason, I've got to execute on some things, and I got to get some things done. You know what? Your role at Bethel Church, you're a great guy. You have an amazing story. You're a loving dad. You're a loving husband. But guess what? That gives you influence, but that doesn't gain you a ton of credibility. What
Yeah.
gives you credibility in your job is you get things done. You know, when something needs to be built, you help build it. When we need to launch a ministry, you help launch it. What you're doing with men for the last 4 years, right? It's a credibility builder. So empathy, execution, and effort are the ways we create the influence to speak in and over the lives of others.
Man, there's just a lifetime of stuff to unpack there, like really incredible. And I think that being able to master each one of those, because it really is a mastery. Like guys really have to stop and think through, what does empathy look like? Right? What does execution look like? How do I continue to move forward after I get hit? And because those things aren't often taught. I mean, I
No.
didn't learn any of that stuff in school growing up. I was taught some of it through my parents, but even then, like not at the level that I needed it. And communication isn't taught in school. Empathy is not taught in school. Anyways, even execution isn't really taught in school. You don't learn execution much.
No.
Um, and so I think a lot of times as men, we can we can read a great leadership book, or we can hear great podcasts like guys are now, and starting to think through like, okay, well, how do I grow in empathy, or what does it look like for me to be great at execution? How do I grow in that stuff? Can you take us a little bit deeper into the how to on those?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you ask because I'm going through an interesting exercise right now. I end my work year this Friday, and I one of my spiritual disciplines is I take the last week, and I go away somewhere. I happen to be in Colorado Springs this week, and really I'm spending time relaxing,
Mm,
reflecting, and in a way, kind of recharging, like getting ready for next year.
that's cool.
Um, but one of the ways that you can learn the best leadership principles is just look to other mentors. Now, that's a word that we throw around a lot in the evangelical world. Go get
Yeah.
yourself a mentor.
Yeah.
Here's a great exercise that every man, every woman watching today could do. Um, so there are 5 areas of my life. One is my spiritual life, my family life, my health and fitness, my professional life, and then what I call my personal life. And part of what I'm doing this week is I'm sitting down in front of the fire pit and just thinking, all right, spiritually, who do I envy?
Mm,
Who seems to be having world class Billy Graham like quiet times? Like I've got people that when I talk to them, they're bilingual. They speak English and they speak Bible. I
yeah.
don't know. I'm sure you've had conversations with
Yes.
Christine Kane. She's the best at it. Like you ask Christine Kane any question, and before she goes, well, here's what I think, she'll go, well, the Bible says. And I'm
John
like,
Bevere. John Bevere is like that too.
yeah, John Bevere, the most biblically literate human being that I
Yep.
know, right? And so, I mean, John's on my list of these are guys that I aspire to be. And so then, I got to ask John Bevere, John, how do you do that? You know, and I asked another mentor, like, how do you memorize so much scripture? And he says, I threw away that read through the Bible in a year plan a long time ago. And I'll read the book of James every day for 30 straight days. Like
Mm,
I'll just pick a month and read those 5 chapters every single day. And I'm like, wow, what a difference that makes.
yeah.
So okay, physically, I mean, you told me that you're in your 40s now, right? Being fit in your 40s is different being fit in your 20s. But and I'm in my 60s. So I'm looking at guys, again, John Bevere's name might pop up, like who's really fit, really athletic, and what are they eating? What exercises are they doing? What's
Yeah.
their rhythms and routines? and just ask people and start to steal from them. One of my favorite quotes about leadership: remember in school, if we stole from one source, that's called plagiarism and they flunked us. But
Yeah.
if you steal from everybody, it's called research and they love you. And so, I do a lot of research. I read a lot of articles on successful people. Books take a lot of time. Articles, I can take 3 or 4 articles on an airplane and read them in an hour. And so just start to list, um, uh, people that are doing things you want to do really well. And envy is not a great word in Christianity, but
I
here's what
like
I've
it.
learned: if if the behaviors that I envy today, if I don't address them, I'm gonna regret them someday, right? I mean, people who are really fit and eat well, if I don't address that, one day I'm gonna eventually regret it. I've got a good friend named Kent Shaw. He's on staff at Brave Church here in Denver, and he's got a quote on his wall in his office: "If I do today what others are unwilling to do, tomorrow I'll do things that others are unable to do."
Wow.
I love that quote. So one would be just start to think about what behaviors, I mean, I watched a podcast with you and your wife, and you're smooth, Jason. I mean, you said something, you had a line like, I could never get tired of looking at you, and I'm like, well done, well played. That's an affirmation, husband to wife. Now, look, not everybody's as smooth as you, but, guys that compliment their wives seem to have pretty happy lives, and so,
Yeah.
I mean, I just look at the best marriages, I look at the best parents, and I've always tried to either emulate what I see or even have conversations with them about, what are you doing? How are you able to do that? So
Okay.
that would be a start.
I love it because you really can't replicate what you don't actually first see. So
Yes.
it's impossible to get somewhere that you've never actually mapped out and never seen. And we, as leaders, we often leave so much up to chance. As men, I would say we leave so much up to, well, if it's God's will, or and the truth is, like, man, so much is in is in God's will that it's our job to partner with God. It's our job to put some effort, some energy, some action behind the dreams that he's given us, behind the desires, and even the pain points are often inside of our dreams and desires as well. And so I really love what you're talking about, because you're saying, hey, go take inventory of the places in your life that you need to grow the most. And by the way, men, we have our battle plan on here. So if you haven't gone and access our battle plan on braveco.org for free. You don't pay anything for it, and it walks you through the most important areas of your life: your finances, your personal health, your relationship with God, your relationship with your wife, right? It walks you through those, and it helps you to get a plan for each one of them and then take action on that plan. It comes with videos and everything. So again, if you're listening to this and you go, "Man, I really want to grow in an area, become more resilient, become more effective in my marriage," you can follow that battle plan. But
Yes.
I, l- I love what you're talking about, because it takes so it takes a lot of foresight, but also humility. I think a lot of the reasons why us as men don't go to that pool more, don't go to, okay, who's doing this better than me, is because our internal voice is so loud at what we're not good at. There's so much shame attached to the areas that we're weak. And I think one of the biggest challenges that men are facing right now in our day and age is this idea that everyone else is further along. I'm not enough. I'm not measuring up. I'm never going to measure up. We live in the Instagram world. I don't want to beat that horse because just we've all heard it too much, but it's real. More men are dealing with shame and not measuring up. So many men have never been initiated. So they didn't have that. This is my son in whom I'm well pleased. They don't have a father that's stepping up going, hey, great job. Therefore, their ego leads their entire life.
Yeah.
Their shame leads their life. Their fear of failure leads their life. Therefore, they never open themselves up to what is it that I can improve upon? Because
Yeah.
that's just a painful realization that I'm not enough. Okay, guys, we have to get to the place where we face our shame, our fear head on so that we can actually get rid of that voice that says you're not enough and listen to and look at the voice that says, where can I improve? And this is maybe a little tip for guys here, and then I'm going to ask you a question, but it's the difference between being the scientist and being the judge. And when my wife and I teach our marriage course a lot, we have a 6-week marriage intensive. We talk about being the scientist versus being the judge. When you're a judge, there's someone that's guilty, someone that's going to go to jail, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. That's the judge, right? The judge is just looking for a judgment. Who's right, who's wrong.
Mm,
That's okay in the court of law. It doesn't actually work in your life because when we have, as soon as you have judgment, you also have shame and guilt and all this stuff. Okay, what does the scientist do? The scientist is awesome because he can go, man, I put a little bit of this and I put a little bit of that, and it was a explosion. It was a complete disaster. But then he goes back to the board and goes, why? What if I did this a little bit different and this a little bit different? Okay, when we keep our ego in check, and we deal with our shame in real time, it allows us to be the scientist. The importance of being the scientist is now I can take a look at my life. What's not working in my marriage? Why did that go wrong? I can actually really look at my own self and go, is how much of this is my inability? How much of this is my fault? That's a great day if you realize your marriage is 80% your fault. I mean, it really is. You can fix 80% of that problem. And I think for men, being able to come to a place where you go, I'm not a better leader because I don't actually take real feedback because it's too painful for me.
right, right.
And if I can work on that, that would be a massive help. I know you have some thoughts around that.
Well, again, Jason, perspective and the paradigms that you live with are really, really important. I can't get better if I don't have some feedback because self-assessing is really hard. You know, I
Yeah, it
mean,
is. It
I
really is.
I mean, I look in the mirror every day. You know, not for long when I get ready, 5 minutes. I don't see a difference in the last 20 years.
Mm,
But boy, my wife, pulls out the digital uh, photo frame and I'm like, what? Or I go get a haircut and it's just all gray. And I'm like, where did that come from?
yeah.
It's hard to self assess. So, we have a saying, we grew up with it in our home, we have it on our teams, and we say, an ugly truth is better than a pretty lie.
Mm,
Let's deal with the ugly truth. I want to say two things to what you just said, and everything you said, I absolutely echo and validate. But one is growth is in stages and steps.
mm.
Probably the biggest mistake that I see in coaching leaders is they're like, I'm going to fix everything all at once.
That's great.
Really hard to do. Don't come in with a 7-page plan.
Yep.
Ask your wife in the next 3 days,
That's great.
honey, tell me one thing I could do to be a better husband.
Yep.
Just one thing. Ask your children, tell me one thing I could do to be a better father. I still date my wife. I still date my adult children. They know they can't order at the restaurant until they've answered that question.
Wow.
When I do one on ones with my team at Integris, tell me what I do that frustrates you.
Wow.
Tell me what I do that makes your job harder. Just tell me one thing. And then I'll work on that one thing. And when we're better there, then we'll ask this question again. But like it's that one thing, the mind thinks in pictures. When I was a college
Mm.
basketball coach, I learned that, at the end of the game and you're ahead, you don't want your team to foul. And I'd be yelling, don't foul, don't foul. Well, what picture did I just put in their head? Right. And then we knock a guy over. I'm like, what are we doing? I learned the mind thinks in pictures, and so I started screaming, hands off, hands off, hands off, and I'm all my guys, their hands are off. And that's just what I wanted. So create pictures. My
Wow.
wife and I, we went away for the weekend 2 weekends ago. And I just said, hey, let's have honeymoon love. Let's act like we're on our honeymoon, and so, I mean, it's probably gross in the Starbucks, 2 6-year-olds holding
Amazing.
staring at each other. But I was just like, create a word picture. And I do that with, even today with my adult children, fathers, when your kids come to you, ask them, what role am I playing here? My daughter called me this morning. Her and her husband are looking for a new car, and she's all excited. And I said, okay, am I cheerleader dad saying, oh, I love that car, go buy it?
Yeah.
Or am I logical Lyle to say, have you looked at this? Have you, and, or am I relationship expert and give you 3 questions you should ask your husband? And she's like, you're the cheerleader because I love this car. And I'm like, I love it too. So go get feedback. Ask simple questions. What's one thing I could do? Um, you know, Tell me one thing I could do to make your life or your job easier. I mean, what wife wouldn't want to hear that from their husband? What employee wouldn't want to hear that from their boss? And then get permission. Like, hey, are you really asking me for the truth? Do you want me to be a cheerleader or a coach right here? That to me, again, that's leadership because leadership is about others, and we can't ever,
Mm.
ever, ever forget that. A negotiator is about themselves. A leader is about others. And I know a
Wow.
lot of people that call themselves leaders, but
Yeah.
they're truly negotiators.
Wow, that's really an incredible thought. When I look at you and listen to you, I can tell why you're not just why you're a great leader, but why you're an actual leader. If you turn around and no one's following you, you're not a leader. You may be a pioneer, but you're
Yeah.
not a leader, right? And when you have the strength and the foresight and humility to be able to be a learner. And I think like you, I'm just thinking through like what would it be like to have um, a lifetime of asking the same question over and over again to your staff, to your wife, to your kids, and create enough safety and trust that they can give you a real answer, and then the excitement for them that they're gonna experience you work on that and grow. And man, John Maxwell talks about the different levels of leadership. And of course, I'm sure you love Maxwell. I love Maxwell. It affected me so much when I was young. I started to read a lot of his books. My dad would pass them to me. I was learning how to lead a fire crew. We were firefighting, and so developing the leader within you, and then developing the leaders around you, and working through those books. One of the things that I never forgot was, I think he said that the first level of leadership is positional, right? You'll follow me because I'm paying you. You'll follow me because I'm the boss. But then that second level of leadership is permissional, right? I lead men in such a way that it's inspirational. They feel cared about, they feel seen, they feel known. I work hard, right? And so even when I'm at a grocery store and they see me, they still see me as a leader because I've gained that permission in their life. Lyle, you've absolutely done that in your world. And I think this is a major place where, men, we can go from being permissional or positional to permissional by asking these questions and creating a bunch of safety and a bunch of excitement in your relationships with your boss and your relationships with your kids and your spouse by saying, hey, what's one area that I can improve in? I also really love that you said, hey, don't try to fix everything. That is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that we make, and I agree 100%. You see it in the book, Tiny Habits or Atomic Habits, whatever one you like. They're basically pretty much the same. It's awesome. He takes us through the principle of what happens when we ride that wave, and we're about to ride it, of excitement with the new year coming. Everybody makes these New Year's resolutions, and they're massive, they're giant, and we have so much excitement over starting something brand new and conquering this thing that's been a giant in our life, but not enough motivation to continue to do that tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And we know just statistically speaking that most people don't follow through on their New Year's resolutions because you took too big of a bite at first, too big of a jump. And this idea that I'm gonna I'm gonna take a look at what's maybe my marriage is hurting. Okay. So you look at your marriage and you go, man, my marriage is really hurting. And then you go, well, one area in my marriage that's hurting. Could be your sex life. It could be the parenting. It could be your finances, the way that you handle that. But if you break it down, you actually go like, okay, if we could learn to talk to each other more kind, right? If I could do that, and you start to go, what's one step in that right direction? How can I become 1% better at communicating with my wife? I'm not going to fix my sex life. We're not going to fix our finances. We're not going to fix our kids yet. What if I just learned how to communicate better? And if I learned how to listen better, what would that do? I think that this is a big key. What I think I love where you're taking us, because we get so excited about solving our marriage. There's so much hype around, man, this year's the year I'm going to fix my marriage. And we forget that Rome wasn't built in a day. And you probably don't have enough emotional, mental, physical, uh, relational energy to solve the entire thing at once. If you could, you would have already done it. But we have enough energy to just look at that one thing and to begin to work on it. I want to ask a question real quick. Um, I know just through like Angela Duick's work and a couple other people that resilience and grit is one of the most important um, things that we can build as a leader. It's what we talked about when you're sharing the analogy with the college player, right? Who
Right.
he rushed for the most yards. Clearly, he's working on being resilient and gritty. He possesses that. He gets hit. His yards after contact are staggering. It's probably what half the other players are missing is that grit, that growth, that resilient mindset. How do we build that as men? How do we be able to focus on that 1% and continue to grit out, knowing that, okay, if I just do this and I continue and I'm consistent and I'm persistent, because really without grit, without resilience, there really is no long-term change.
Right. Absolutely.
How do we grow
Well,
that?
yeah. Well, let me just say one thing real quick, Jason. You talk about, the small things that will help solve a marriage. The one thing I would say is this: give your wife and your children your full attention.
Mm,
The beauty of the Gospels is that Jesus stopped, Jesus touched, Jesus knelt, Jesus wept. The most valuable commodity you'll ever give another human being is your full attention.
mm,
And I'll challenge men on this call 20 minutes a day. When my kids were young and it was, they were playing three sports and the life that a lot of you are in right now, my goal was a 20-minute face to face, nose to nose, knee to knee conversation with my
mm,
wife every single day. Now, let me tell you how measured this was. My goal was to do that 20 times a month, only two-thirds of the days, because I knew there were days where we
yeah,
wouldn't see each other awake, for
yeah,
more than 5 minutes.
yeah.
But I said 20-minute conversations at least 20 days out of each month.
Wow.
Give people your full attention. Now, on to grit. Two things. Great question, by the way. Number one, stop being surprised. Ashton Genty isn't surprised when a guy runs his body into him on the
Yeah.
football field. That's the game, right? Stop being surprised. Kids are going to throw up. You're going to likely have a prodigal. When they turn 13, they lose their minds. So for example, when our kids turned 13, I sat with them and said, listen to me, you're a teenager now, and your job is going to be push the boundaries. And
Mm,
my job is going to be setting boundaries. And so we're going to have some of this, and that's natural and that's okay. And we're going to try to talk through that. But just know that conflicts are coming, right? But let's be prepared
wow.
for that conflict.
I love that.
So parents waste so much energy being surprised by things they shouldn't be that surprised
It's
about.
true. It's
You
so
know,
true.
I'm a business owner. I looked at my team's calendars. Today is December 17th, and half of them aren't, they say they're working. They're at Christmas parties, going to doctor's appointments to spend their health savings account before the year ends.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. It's toward, we're on the off ramp. I'm not going to get upset about that. I've got amazing high character people that have given me everything all year long, right? So stop being surprised.
I love it.
Okay. Tension. We go on vacation with our 3 kids in the minivan. Somebody's going to blow a gasket. It
Yes.
happens.
That's
So
amazing advice.
know that challenge is coming. The second thing is this, to your point, what gets you to persevere is understanding your purpose and your process. So I'll leave this because I think we're running out of time, but
Yeah, we are,
every
man.
leader needs a purpose statement. Why do you believe God
Yes.
put you on this planet? I was put here to equip and encourage kingdom leaders for greater impact. That is all I do. That is all I think about.
Wow.
Um, but my purpose statement, how do I want that to look? Is I want to do hard things with people I really care about, and I want to have fun doing it. And
Mm.
so, hard things, I expect there to be challenges and difficulties, but I'm going to be with people I really care about. And if I can't trust you, if I don't value you, it's going to be really difficult for me to work with you long term. And then we always kind of look for the silver lining. We used to say this when we go on vacation: it's not a great trip until something unexpected happens, because that's where the story is, right? The story is we got delayed, delayed, delayed. We had to sleep in the airport. It's a terrible trip, but it becomes a really cool story. So, purpose, process, that will push you through the grit, and who you're doing it with really, really matters.
Man, I love that. The, this is so cool. You're awesome, Lyle. I'm so glad that I met you. I just love this conversation. I've been taking tons of notes as you're talking, um, because it's just the, I agree 100%. When we get surprised because we haven't actually thought through and prepared ourselves for, whatever it is, leading your marriage or your kids, or and haven't prepared your team well enough, haven't prepared your wife well enough, it just ends up in disappointment, right? I have this unmet expectation. I thought we were going to take a minivan ride from here to, from Reading to wherever, and the kids not fight and not argue. That's not going to happen. Um, I, every morning I wake up, I have to have a really great plan for how are we going to do this morning well. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So my wife and I are always talking about the plan. What's the plan? What's your day look like? What's my day like? How are we gonna help Edie? My daughter has some sensory issues,
Mm,
so she gets really dysregulated. Just getting dressed. We have a plan for getting her dressed. I have a plan for her feeling really, really dysregulated. We have a plan. At first, it was very scary because there was no plan. The first 3 months, it was like, oh my gosh, she's doing stuff I've never seen her do before. She's growling at me. My 4-year-old's growling at me. She's yelling at me, and it was like, wow, none of our other kids did this. How do I handle this? Now we have a plan for that. It's not catching us off guard. And I really think that's true. We don't talk about that a lot when it comes to grit, when it comes to perseverance. But I really think that that's true. If you understand that life's challenging, every day you have an opportunity to show up and to decide how you're going to deal with a difficult situation that you didn't expect. You don't have to plan for the good things. You have to plan for the challenging things. And one of the we have a discipleship course. I was telling you about it a little bit, Lyle,
yeah.
when you first came on. The first 12 weeks is our foundations of masculinity. What's it mean to be a man? How to process pain. We give guys a 5-step process for dealing with pain. How to set healthy boundaries. How to work through the father wound. Lesson 3 in this on this 12-week course is your ethos. So when we talk about ethos, we're looking at your values, your purpose, your mission statement, your core values, and putting them all into the one statement. This is what it means to be a Valentin. This is what my core values are. This is what this is how this is the mission that I'm on. And what I've seen that do in men's life, just like you're talking, is before you before you ever get into discipleship, if you didn't have a mission statement and a vision statement and your purpose and your core values, then you just end up going, giving your energy and your effort and your time to whatever feels like you should that day. Once you really start to narrow down and you go, okay, this is my ethos. This is who I am. This is where my time, effort, and energy is getting spent. This is what my mission is on this earth. This is what my overall vision is. This is what you can expect from me. It really does may help you to push that extra mile when you get hit, that extra mile when you come home, that extra mile. And it's awesome, man. Lyle, thank you so much for coming, for giving us some of these nuggets. Guys, I really think that you should check out some of Lyle's products. He has a book that he released. It's called the 5-Day Leadership. And then Lyle, you're writing another book right now, are you not? Can you just tell us how to
Yeah.
how to get access to your
Um,
stuff?
uh, so the next book is called Easy to Follow. If you look at the scriptures, Jesus is never referred to as a leader. The only time the word lead is associated with Jesus is geographically. He would
Wow.
lead them to the Mount of Olives or, led them to Jerusalem. And yet Jesus is the greatest leader this world has ever known.
Yeah.
And so in doing that research, I realized that it's because he was so easy to follow. With, really the rich young ruler, with one exception, every other place in scripture where he says, follow me, people do. And so being easy to follow is one of the greatest characteristics that any leader can have. You
Mhm.
said a leader who doesn't have followers is just out for a walk. And so there's 8 principles that we see in the life of Jesus. He taught, he didn't tell. So he was a mentor. He grew people. He didn't manage them, so to speak.
Mm.
He was generous. Leaders are generous with their time and with their resources, with their wisdom. So that comes out next year. 5-Day Leader is just a study of the most successful leaders I've ever worked with and what did they have in common. And then to your point, we simplify it by saying, here's 3 things to do on Monday. Move the
Oh,
needle
cool.
on Monday by doing these 3 things. Tuesday, we talked about grit today. Tuesday is tough Tuesday. Like, let's have a tough day Tuesday. Let's work. Wednesday is wow Wednesday. Make some people say wow by doing these things, and so on and so forth. So it's a simple little book. There's the 5-Day Leader website. You can go find it at our Integris website or at Lead with Lyle on social media. But man, if you need it, if there's ever anything we can do for you, our heart is to cross the road. We say no to nobody when
Wow.
it comes to serving leaders because we know that no organization rises above the level of its leadership. So
Wow.
your family, they're stuck under your leadership. Your team, they're stuck under your leadership. So
Lyle, you are an awesome man. You're incredible. I can just tell in this one conversation, very short conversation, that people do want to follow you, and it's really inspirational. You're the type of guy that I love having on a podcast, because we need men that we can look to and go, okay, yeah, that I wanna do what Lyle's doing when he goes home. Right? It helps me to be brave, helps me to show up, and I also know that I'm not alone in it. So, man, that's your challenge. Your challenge this week. He already gave it to you earlier. It was go home and ask 3 questions, right? And do those questions well, man. Lyle, thanks again so much. Guys, stay brave out there. We'll see you next week on the BraveCo podcast.
bless you.
Hey, BraveCo men. Hopefully you loved this week's episode. Listen, if you have not subscribed to our podcast, you are already behind. Go ahead and click right here to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have not watched last week's episode, you can click right here and watch last week's episode. And listen, if you want to upgrade your wardrobe, you can check out some of our new hats that we have in stock and all our other swag. Go to braveco.org and you can look at our store there. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.